So, because travel is something that's really important to me and that I've always enjoyed, and frankly, I want to do more with this channel than just talk about depressing political shit. I thought I would do a video that'll be helpful in terms of advice for travelers. That is, if we're ever allowed to travel anywhere again. So, this list I thought I would do is basically a list of the biggest rookie travel mistakes and blunders that I see, like people who are not overly experienced with traveling, that I see them doing. And I was at least at one point guilty of all of these myself, but I feel like I've learned to get past most of them. So, anyway, here are some of these biggest rookie travel mistakes. The first few are kind of interrelated. Basically, only sticking to the major attractions or landmarks and not actually exploring the back streets or the backcountry trails. So that would be like, say, for instance, if you were in Banff National Park, just seeing Lake Louise, Moraine Lake, the other most famous lakes, just seeing the lakes and not actually hiking on any trails. Or let's say if you're in Rome, only like jumping just from like St. Peter's to the Colosseum or whatever, and not really exploring any of the neighborhoods. And this is something I see people doing a lot. I used to be like this when I was younger and less experienced. And honestly, a lot of the best experiences you'll have are in exploring those back streets or back country areas. Now, I think part of the reason is some people do this is because they're just not in good physical shape and they can't take very much walking. And frankly, that's another mistake is like choosing someone as your travel companion who is just not very physically fit if you are, because that can be a huge point of confrontation on trips is different levels of physical fitness. But yeah, sorry, that ties into that. Like basically just zipping from attraction to attraction and not really actually exploring the cities, the towns, the trails, depending on what type of destination you're in. And that kind of ties into another one is only sticking to big cities and not exploring the small towns or the villages. Now, I see this a lot in Europe. A lot of people who I spoke to at hostels, they seem to like only be visiting the big cities. Like they would go to Prague or Budapest, but they wouldn't see anywhere else in the Czech Republic or Hungary, for instance. And that's just a big mistake because I find like in a lot of the small towns, you really see some of the local culture more. Frankly, you see the locals more, especially in Western Europe, because in Western Europe, a lot of the cities are extremely multicultural, extremely full of immigrants. And like if you want to see really what the local people actually look like, um, you'll get a better idea from going to the small towns. Because in the cities, frankly, it's often hard to tell who's a local and who's an immigrant because you get people from all over the world, from other parts of Europe, or from like kind of ambiguous countries where they look like they could be white or they could be local or they could not be. And it's like, frankly, if you want to actually see the local phenotypes, the best way to do that is to go to the smaller towns and villages. So again, that's another big mistake. And in some countries, it's an even bigger mistake, like in Germany, because in Germany, the big cities are often less architecturally well preserved. They're often like completely obliterated in World War II. And it's like if you want to see like real German architecture, you have to go to the small towns often. So, yeah, and tying into that, another mistake is people not knowing which places survived World War II intact, and thus visiting places in Europe that were heavily decimated in World War II and thus look very ugly today. Like, I see a lot of people doing that and they get all disappointed, and it's like, well, if you'd done your research, you would have known. Like, some cities that people expect to be architecturally well preserved are not. Like, say, for instance, Athens. Athens is not a very architecturally well preserved city. I've never been there, but I know that because I've done research into it. And this is one good thing about having Google Street View is it makes it a lot easier to find this information out. Like use Google Street View, use a Google search, like try to do your Googles, try to research the places you're going to, because if you care a lot about, architectural preservation, and I think like if you're visiting Europe, like why wouldn't you want to see places that have European architecture? To me, that just doesn't make sense. So it's like I think yeah, doing your research about that sort of thing, I would say basically the three worst countries for that in Europe are Germany, Poland, and Greece. Those are the three countries where the majority of major cities are not very well preserved. I would say the only big exception in terms of large cities is Krakow in Poland. And like Warsaw is a mixed bag because some of it has been reconstructed. Same with Gdansk and like Wrocław and Poznan. But again, it's only part of the town is reconstructed, and large parts of the old town still have that hideous post-war look. So again, like I mean, some countries you don't have to do as much research. Like say for instance, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. Like you could basically throw a dart on the map, and anywhere you hit will probably be architecturally well preserved and beautiful. Same with I'd say most of France, at least the southern half of France. I would say you could pretty much throw a dart on the map. Northern France is a bit more inconsistent in that regard. You kind of have to do your research because some parts of northern France were devastated pretty badly in World War II, whereas other parts not at all. Same with Belgium and Netherlands; they're pretty inconsistent. England is pretty inconsistent. The Baltic countries like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania are pretty inconsistent. Germany, I would say consistently the major cities are not very well preserved at all. If you want to go somewhere in Germany that's well preserved, I would say it has to be probably a smaller city or smaller town, like Heidelberg or Bamberg would probably be like some of the bigger cities you can find, and even those are like 300,000 people. And even among the small towns and villages in Germany, it's not consistently well preserved either. So I would say definitely do your research there. Other places like say Czech Republic, you can pretty much throw a dart on the map. Hungary, Slovakia, those are all very well preserved. Austria, somewhat inconsistent, but fairly well preserved. Switzerland's very well preserved. Croatia, mostly well preserved, although there's a few exceptions like Zadar. Um, yeah, I would say like a lot of countries are inconsistent. So do your research. Another one is trying to see as many places as possible and thus not spending enough time in any single place to truly absorb it. And that's a huge travel mistake a lot of people make. They just try to zip everywhere, see everything in a limited amount of time. And again, it's not entirely their fault because if they're Canadian or American, they probably have hardly any vacation time anyway, which really sucks. But at the end of the day, you still might enjoy your trip more if you spend those 2 weeks, if you go to like one or two places and really see them, a few towns, a few cities, rather than trying to see like all of Europe or half of Europe in 2 weeks. Like that's not a good idea. Like say for instance, if I had 2 weeks and I was gonna go to Italy, I might spend the time like Rome, Florence, Venice, Verona, Bologna, Cinque Terre, Pisa, Lucca, Siena. Like I'd try to see like the highlights of like central and northern Italy. I wouldn't even bother like trying to fit in like southern Italy or fit in other countries. You know what I mean? Like I'd try to like confine it to generally the whole north slash central region. And even then, I may not go to like I may not go to Milan or Turin or Genoa or Bergamo or anywhere in like the northwest part. Like it's you can't see everything on a limited time span and enjoy it. Like some people, for instance, they go to like Italy for 2 weeks and they try to see the entire country, and it's like, okay, you're not gonna have that much fun. You're gonna be like spending most of your trip on the train. And when you get to these places, you're going to have such a limited time frame to see them that I don't think you're going to really absorb much of anything. You're going to get like a very superficial surface level experience, but you're not going to be able to like explore all the back streets, see the nice architecture, like not just the main squares or the main cathedrals, but like the alleyways, the back streets, the really nice parts that aren't completely crowded with tourists. Plus, even if you get to see like the cathedrals and palaces, you may have to zip through them and hardly spend any time in them. So and you just don't get to see all these details. Like you don't get to like admire all the little carvings and engravings and paintings on the walls, like it's just not as fun and it's not as it feels like you don't absorb it and you don't really get as much out of it. Like you don't get as much enjoyment out of it and you don't get as much appreciation out of it because you're not like absorbing it as well. So I'd say it's better to go to fewer places and absorb them better rather than more places and hardly absorb them at all. And I see this mistake largely among younger people. Actually, to be honest, among old people, I actually see the opposite mistake where they may spend too much time in one place. Like some boomers will like spend 2 weeks in the same city and never leave it. And I think that's actually going too far in the opposite direction. Like they'll spend 2 weeks in Rome and they won't leave Rome at all. Or they'll spend like 2 weeks in some small town and they will hardly leave that small town. And it's like, yeah, I feel like ne- you have to find some balance between those two approaches. So yeah, that would be another. A related one is just going to only the most popular destinations, never going off the beaten path, and therefore always being surrounded by crowds of tourists. Now, this can mean like going to specific cities and towns that are full of tourists, but it could also mean like even if you go to a city or a town that's full of tourists, you can actually get off the beaten path within that town often or within that city by going onto the back streets into certain like historic neighborhoods that are still historic and streets that are still historic but aren't the main streets, aren't the main neighborhoods, and thus um will have fewer tourist crowds. Like you can honestly find certain streets that are very beautiful, very historic, even in cities like Venice or Prague that don't have as many tourists. And that's because you just got to know where to look. Uh, you kind of got to try to get off the beaten path, like try, like find places that still have that beautiful historic architecture, but aren't as full of tourists. And even in national parks, it's the same thing. Like, you can find trails that are beautiful, but don't have as many people. Often those are the longer trails, because the shorter ones are full of like people who aren't in that good physical shape. Whereas if you go on a longer hiking trail, even if it's to a popular destination, there will be less people simply because that kind of it kind of filters out the people who aren't very physically fit. And that means automatically there'll be fewer people. So I would say that like never going off the beaten path is another problem. Another one is people eating the same types of food that they would eat at home, and even in many cases, going to the exact same chain restaurants that they would go to at home. And it's like, if you're gonna do that, why even go anywhere? Like, if you're not gonna sample the local food like at all, I don't understand that. Like, I get it if you're in a hurry. Sometimes if you're really in a hurry, you have to eat at like McDonald's or whatever. But it's like every single day, come on. Like, I mean, find something local to eat. Like, step a little bit outside your comfort zone. Like, it doesn't even have to be something super expensive. Like, in most countries, there's some sort of like variation of the local cuisine that is relatively cheap. Like in Italy, for instance, you can find pizza places that have authentic local pizza but are not extremely expensive. Uh, or same with like crepes. Like in Paris, they have some of these like crepe vendors that aren't ridiculously expensive, where you can get like savory crepes with meat inside them that are not overly expensive. Um, Only in a few countries would I say the local cuisine is like inherently slow or inherently expensive. Like most countries have some sort of like cheap fast food variation of their local cuisine that's not just like, McDonald's or whatever. Like in Italy there are places where you can get a slice of pizza that's delicious and tastes like local pizza, not like American pizza. Um Same with like, as I said, crepes in France, at least in Paris. Now, there's some countries where, yeah, the local cuisine is harder to get if you're in a rush or if you're on a budget. Like, say, for instance, in Spain, for instance, like if you want something that's cheap and fast, you're probably going to get either fast food or a kebab. Same with Germany, I find. There were some places in Germany that had like local German style sausages like bratwurst with the bun and the sauerkraut. But some places don't have that, and it's like you gotta sell for like some kind of fast food or kebab or whatever if you want something that's cheap and fast. So it's like it really depends where you're going. But I think in some countries there's no excuse. Like in Italy, there's no excuse. There's plenty of food that's local and fast. Same with Britain. There's plenty of good British food that's quick and cheap. Or at least in Paris, I can't speak for the rest of France because I haven't explored that much of France. But yeah, that's another mistake. A similar mistake is people only going to destinations and attractions that are very similar to where they live. This was actually something that I had a huge problem with when I was a kid. When I was a kid, like growing up in the Toronto area, I always wanted to like visit certain cities in the world that were like similar to Toronto. Like I really wanted to go to Vancouver. I really wanted to go to Sydney or Melbourne or whatever. And it's like I don't know what's wrong. Like again, I was a kid, so it's like kids aren't always that smart. And it's like but I do find this is a thing where people they want to travel to like the opposite side of the world and then go somewhere that reminds them of home. And I was even making this mistake when I was younger when I went to London and England. I went to a lot of attractions like certain museums that were kind of similar to museums back home, like say the Science Museum or whatever. And my dad actually pointed that out. He's like, why do you want to go here? This is just like back home. And I realized like, yeah, he was kind of right. Like and I see this with friends of mine too. Like I have friends of mine, for instance, from Brazil, and then they want to go to America, but then they want to go to Miami. And it's like, really? If you're going all the way to the USA, you want to go to the one city that's by far the most similar to Brazil? I don't understand that at all. So it's like, yeah, like going to places across the world that are like similar to home, it's like, why even do that? Why not just stay home? Like, I understand, like, maybe there's a certain happy median between a place being too familiar and too exotic. Like for instance, a lot of Europe fits that happy median for me. Like it's familiar enough to feel comfortable, but different enough that I'm seeing places that aren't exactly like home. Whereas, say, for instance, somewhere like China might be a bit too exotic or too unfamiliar for me. I kind of get that, but at the same time, it's like, for instance, to go to the opposite side of the world just to go to Sydney, which is a very similar city to Toronto, and not go to like the Australian outback, it's like, no, that's not even worth it. So that would be another one. Another one is like not researching the places you're going beforehand. Like the attractions, the neighborhoods, stuff like that. Um, People go to a place and then they don't enjoy it, often because they did no research beforehand and they don't even know where to go and what to see. That's a huge problem. And it's like, I get that some people don't have that much time to plan a trip beforehand, but at very least, like, do some basic research. And you could do research also while you're at the hotel, like while you're staying there, when you have internet access at the hotel. Um, but yeah, definitely do some research. Don't just like fly blind the entire trip. Don't just wing it, do some research. A final one is the mistake I see people make is like assuming that they can just go back, assuming there will be a next time, being like, I feel kind of tired right now. I kind of want to see that one thing, that one place, that one neighborhood, that one lake, that one mountain, that one trail, that one museum, that one building, that one neighborhood, whatever. I want to see it, but like I feel kind of tired. I kind of want to go back to the hotel. Fuck it. I'll see it next time. That is a huge mistake because you are assuming that there will be a next time. And making this mistake can often lead to a lot of regret in the long run. Like there are places where I felt that way, where I shirked off seeing it because I kind of felt a bit tired or exhausted or like, oh, I've seen so many things. I feel, you know, do I have to see this one thing too? But it's like, actually, yeah, you kind of do because I feel like if you don't do it, you're going to regret it later. And you can't always assume that there will be a next time because, I mean, there may not be. And I mean, like the place, for instance, it could be like the COVID pandemic. You could be banned from like leaving your fucking county. Or maybe you get caught committing some bullshit crime and then all of a sudden you're not allowed to go into certain countries. Or the place could burn down. There could be a forest fire and it will be no longer anywhere near as beautiful afterward. Or, if it's a building, it could burn down. There's a lot of things that could happen. Terrorists could blow it up. There could be like some diplomatic issue where like suddenly you're no longer allowed to go into that country because of which country you're from. Economic reasons. You could be too poor to go back. You could lose your job. You could lose your source of income. You could suddenly no longer be able to afford to travel. You could have kids. You could get married. A lot of fucking things could happen. You could have alimony payments, divorce. There's a million things that could happen that could get in your way of traveling in the future. And I know I'm seeming to contradict myself because I say don't overwhelm yourself by seeing too many things, but I'm also saying don't miss out on things by assuming you'll be able to later. But I don't think it's entirely contradictory because I'm not saying to do things at a fast pace. But I am saying if you're doing things at a reasonable pace, but yet you still miss out on something just out of sheer laziness or sheer just this blasé attitude, like, oh, I'll be able to see it next time. Like, there's a certain happy median, as I said, between zipping around and seeing too many things, but also on the other extreme, having the attitude, oh, I don't have to see that one place. I can see it next time. Like, there may not be a next time. And just keep that in mind. Never, ever never take it for granted that you'll be able to go to a particular place again. Never take it for granted that there will be a next time. Because there may not be a next time. Or if there is a next time, the place may not be as nice as it was before. Like, there could be a forest fire, or like, say, for instance, a particular city or town could just go kind of downhill. Like a lot of people, for instance, they say Paris is going downhill and it just feels like the crime rate, just the signs of decay are getting worse with each passing year, each passing decade. A lot of places are probably like that where it's like they're just kind of getting more sketchy as time goes on. So it's like, even if you can go there again, it may not be as nice next time. The experience may not be as nice. You know, you might be like, say, for instance, you're in Banff or one of these national parks, be like, oh, I don't care about I'll see that lake later. You know, I want to see just Lake Louise and Moraine Lake. I could see the other lakes later, but then it's like you come back a year or 5 years later and there was a massive forest fire and that lake is not as beautiful as it was before. These kind of things can happen, and you should not simply assume you can just go back somewhere and it'll be just as nice next time. So those are some travel mistakes I see a lot of people make, and hopefully I hope this video will help you avoid making these mistakes in the future, assuming we have a future as far as travel is concerned.